Blood of the Wilderness. Author, Tuấn. The first rays of sunlight began to penetrate through the thick fog, illuminating the scene of a highland market in the northwest. The roosters crowed at dawn, but the villagers were already bustling, preparing their goods to arrive at the market on time. This market only convened twice a month, so the atmosphere was lively and bustling, akin to markets elsewhere. Tuyết Dung and Thi An, two college girls from a university in Hanoi, had been at this market since 8 in the morning. They came partly to satisfy their restless legs and their hobby of travel photography, but also to complete an essay on the culture and lives of people in the highland markets. Clearly, they could have found this information online, but they both thought that this real-life trip could not only help them complete their essay, but also provide a chance to relax after exhausting study hours. Tuyết Dung and Thi An wandered around the market. Along the sides of the market path, many items were displayed for exchange and trade brought by ethnic villagers. Seeds, liquor jars, or rolls of fabric placed in baskets or on mats. The women, with their dark, wrinkled skin, greeted customers cheerfully. Their smiles were warm and genuine, reflecting the simplicity and hospitality. The atmosphere at the market was filled with the colors of traditional costumes amidst the majestic backdrop of the northwest mountains and forests. Tuyết Dung and Thi An not only captured their favorite photos, but also took notes of the unique features of the attire and culture here. Stopping at a stall selling silver jewelry crafted by ethnic villagers, Thi An was captivated by the shimmering bracelets and necklaces. Tuyết Dung, come over here and look. Thi An called out to Tuyết Dung while glancing at the stall and waving her hand. What's up? Jewelry, huh? Well, we don't have much time. Let's take a quick look around the market to learn more about the traditional games here. Then head back, Tuyết Dung replied. Come on, it's not often we get to come up here. Let's pick out a bracelet for me. Thi An urged Tuyết Dung to join her. Both of them gazed at the small table filled with various types of jewelry, from rings, bracelets, necklaces, to different styles of silver threads, all dazzling to the eyes. Tuyết Dung was about to choose something as a memento when suddenly she felt a chill, a sensation as if someone was watching them with ill intent. She turned left and right to confirm if her intuition was correct. However, the market was still bustling with people, making it hard to determine who might be watching them. Suddenly, Tuyết Dung glanced towards a corner at the end of the market and saw a person wearing indistinct ethnic clothing, selling a unique basket containing a few dry branches. This person occasionally glanced at her, and whenever Tuyết Dung looked back, he would look away. Despite Thi An being engrossed in the jewelry, Tuyết Dung was curious about the stranger. This person wore a worn-out hat and ethnic clothing, making it difficult to discern his ethnicity. As Tuyết Dung approached, she realized he was a middle-aged man with a long scar running from his forehead to his eye. Seeing Tuyết Dung approaching, he spoke up. What do you need? He didn't seem to be of the kin ethnicity, and his disjointed speech and abrupt question made Tuyết Dung uncomfortable. She asked back, So, what are you selling here? The man replied, Destiny, love, career, happiness. Tuyết Dung almost burst out laughing. Clearly, he was eccentric. Thankfully, she was alone. Otherwise, Thi An would have teased her relentlessly. About to stand up and leave, the man suddenly called out, Numgaw, midnight on the 13th of the 7th lunar month. Tuyết Dung froze, astonished at the man. Clearly, she had never met him, yet he knew her exact birth date. Before Tuyết Dung could respond, he continued, I see bad energy around you, probably due to recent family bereavement. Plus, you've been encountering misfortune lately, haven't you? You recently had an accident that caused bleeding, right? Tuyết Dung frowned. Indeed, last month, cancer claimed the life of her beloved grandfather. And just a few days ago, she slipped in the bathroom, causing an iron coat hanger to cut a long gash on her arm, requiring 3 stitches. Suspicious, she approached the man hesitantly and asked, "Are you a fortune teller?" The man shook his head. "I'm not a fortune teller. I'm just a wandering salesman who knows a little about physiognomy. I see you're a yin person born under the 7 killings day and hour, which is not good for your physical health, so I thought I'd offer a little advice." Though he only spoke a few words, Tuyết Dung was somewhat superstitious, feeling that this eccentric man was different from other scam artists. Still a bit skeptical, she asked again, "Are you simply trying to remind me of something?" Tuyết Dung asked. The man squinted his eyes, his smile causing the long scar on his face to press against the edge of his eye, looking quite intimidating. He took a dry branch from the basket in front of him, devoid of flowers or leaves, with only 3 buds wrapped in a small piece of white cloth. He spoke with a somewhat sinister tone. "I think this might help you improve the bad omens around you. Are you interested?" Tuyết Dung looked at the dry branch in the old man's hand, teasingly. "Are you suggesting I use this to cast a spell?" The man remained serious. "If I said it's something to make wishes come true, would you believe me?" Tuyết Dung couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Do you think I'm a child?" As Tuyết Dung reached for the dry branch, intending to peel off the cloth covering the 3 buds, the man stopped her. "If you don't believe, it's best not to unwrap it." Curiosity often got the better of Tuyết Dung. She really wanted to know what those 3 buds looked like under the cloth. After a moment's thought, she decided to ask about the price. "All right, so how much for this dry branch?" The man squinted again, shaking his head. "Not for sale, it's for you." Tuyết Dung was taken aback. Before she could say anything, the man suddenly lowered his voice, his tone becoming eerie and mystical. "This is blood of the wilderness, an extremely rare herb. It can only thrive on blood, whether human or animal. But its greatest power is unleashed when bathed in the blood of newborns." Tuyết Dung's hair stood on end, unsure if the man in front of her was deliberately trying to intimidate and deceive her. But according to his words, the process of caring for this dry branch seemed excessively cruel and malevolent. She remained calm and asked further, "What is its purpose?" The man replied, "As I said, to make wishes come true. The bigger the wish, the more blood the blood of the wilderness requires, and it will help you fulfill your desires most easily if bathed in human blood, especially that of newborns." Tuyết Dung paled. She couldn't believe there could be such a bizarre plant in this world. It couldn't be. Was she being deceived by a lunatic? Yes, this man was just trying to scare her. There couldn't possibly be a dry branch nurtured by human blood capable of granting wishes like in fairy tales. At this moment, her mind suddenly spun, and her logic forced her to believe that the words of the man were entirely true. Plus, her curiosity about the flower inside the white cloth made her decide to accept the branch. The man took out a worn-out piece of paper and handed it to her, adding, "Remember, the blood of the wilderness can only fulfill 1 wish per day and never harm it. Here's a charm to chant while praying." Tuyết Dung took a deep breath, trying to ask the man a bit more about how to care for it. Then she left, leaving behind the eerie gaze and demonic smile of the strange man. "Where are you going after choosing my bracelet? What's this? Did you find a tiny cherry blossom branch somewhere? Why does it look like a piece of dry firewood?" Thuyan noticed Tuyết Dung carrying the branch and immediately asked. Tuyết Dung thought that if she recounted the conversation she had just had with a crazy man about the branch that could grant wishes, Thuyan would laugh and tease her, perhaps even tell their friends. which would only make her feel embarrassed. Tuyết Dung chose her words carefully. "Oh, it's not a cherry blossom. It's a wildflower branch I brought back to graft and see if the flowers will be beautiful." Hearing that, Thuy didn't ask any further. They continued to stroll around the market to gather more information before returning to the bus station to catch the bus back to the city. Sitting on the bus, Tuyết Dung put the branch into her backpack and hugged it to her chest. The length of the branch was taller than the backpack, so the 3 buds wrapped in white cloth protruded out. After a long and tiring day, Tuyết Dung quickly fell asleep, while Thuy, sitting on the opposite seat, was quite fascinated, looking back at the photos she had taken earlier in the day. As the bus hit a bump, Tuyết Dung's branch kept poking Thuy next to her, making her a little uncomfortable. When she turned, she found Tuyết Dung already asleep, and suddenly, Thuy noticed the 3 buds on the branch wrapped in white cloth. She immediately reached out to remove the small piece of white cloth covering one bud to take a closer look. The small white cloth, barely the size of her pinky finger, covering one end of the twig, was gently removed by Thuy, only to find that it wasn't a flower inside. It resembled a small, black, spiky sphere, unlike anything from any known plant. Thuy reached out to touch the spiky sphere, and just then, as the bus jolted, the spikes pricked her finger, drawing blood. Thuy couldn't help but let out a cry. Tuyết Dung, who was asleep, suddenly woke up. Seeing Thuy squeezing her bleeding finger, she asked, "What happened?" Thuy frowned. "It's your dry branch. When the bus jolted, it poked me. It's so uncomfortable. And why did you bring this cursed tree? It's all thorns." Tuyết Dung looked at the bud Thuy had just unwrapped, only now realizing that this twig didn't have flowers. Probably the other 2 buds wrapped in white cloth were the same, a thorny ball. Tuyết Dung was contemplating its appearance, trying to identify what plant this twig resembled, when suddenly, pop! Thuy forcefully broke off the spiky ball, and it rolled onto the seat. Before Tuyết Dung could say anything, Thuy chuckled happily, saying, "Never mind you. If I don't know, and if it makes me bleed again, I'll break the whole branch." Tuyết Dung suddenly remembered the words of the vendor, "Never harm the twig." Then she looked at Thuy, her friend who had just broken one end of the twig. Besides a bit of blood flowing from her finger, Thuy seemed fine, but if she broke the twig, it would lose its function. She began to feel vague doubts about being deceived by that strange man. Tuyết Dung couldn't help but laugh along with Thuy. The 2 were very close friends, so they understood each other extremely well. Their temperaments were not unfamiliar, so teasing each other like this happened often. However, this time, since Thuy broke one end of the thorny ball, Tuyết Dung felt a burning sensation in her heart, as if something was about to go wrong. And both of them failed to notice that the drop of blood Thuy shed was slowly being absorbed by the spiky ball, rolling and wriggling under the seat in a strange and eerie manner. Tuyết Dung and Thuy shared a room in a boarding house not far from the university. However, a few months ago, Thuy had to move out. It turned out that there was a guy in that dorm who liked Thuy, but whenever she saw him, she chased him away like a demon. The guy was persistent, and the more Thuy chased, the more he approached, annoying her, so she decided to move out to avoid meeting him and reduce the annoyance. Since bringing the dry twig home, Tuyết Dung immediately planted it in a small porcelain pot filled with soil. Still skeptical about the story the strange man told her at the market, she decided to go to the market to buy some pig blood to test it out. She placed the porcelain pot in a secluded corner, fearing that pouring pig blood would cause a smell and attract flies and mosquitoes. Carefully, Tuyết Dung poured the pig blood into the porcelain pot, then was horrified to see the twig gradually sucking up the blood. Terrified, Tuyết Dung muttered to herself, "Could it be? That man was telling the truth." Trying to calm down, Tuyết Dung suddenly remembered the name and purpose of it. What was it again? The guy said it was, "Oh, blood orchid." Right. After pouring the blood, I have to make a wish immediately. Tuyết Dung hurriedly searched for the piece of paper that the man had given her and folded her hands in front of the blood orchid pot, looking at the paper while reciting, "The mortal Tuyết Dung, born on the 13th of the 7th lunar month, has completed the blood offering ceremony, praying to the blood god to grant the mortal 500,000 dong." After finishing her prayer, even Tuyết Dung had to laugh at her amateurish and worldly way of asking for a wish. The reason being that she was afraid that if she asked for too much, the divine spirit wouldn't grant it. So she started with a small wish first, gradually asking for more as she became more experienced. Once done, she looked around to see if any money had fallen beside her. But besides the quiet room, there was nothing. Tuyết Dung sighed deeply. Alas, in the end, it's still a scam. Tuyết Dung was angry, about to throw away the porcelain pot when suddenly her phone rang twice. Ting, ting. It was the sound notification from her banking app. Tuyết Dung opened it and saw that 500,000 dong had just been transferred into her account along with a message. "Congratulations! You have won the lucky draw prize from the shopping promotion program at store number 5. Thank you for your support." Tuyết Dung was ecstatic. Oh my God, was this real? The blood orchid? The wish-granting thing? Was it real? She couldn't contain her excitement and jumped for joy, thinking that there couldn't be anyone happier than her in the world. She could have anything she wanted, just with a bit of pig blood, and she would have 500,000 dong. What a bargain. But then she remembered the words of the strange man who said that the blood orchid could only grant one wish per day. If she wanted more, she needed human blood to water the plant. Thinking about this, Tuyết Dung shuddered. Where could she find human blood now? Would she have to resort to killing someone to get blood? Well, she thought, for now, she could just use pig blood to nourish the orchid. She didn't have any grand wishes that required human blood. But that was just Tuyết Dung's initial naive thought. She had no idea that bringing the blood orchid home marked the beginning of the horror and terror slowly engulfing her life. So after that day, she frequented the meat shops with the purpose of buying pig blood to nurture the orchid. The dry twig she planted in the porcelain pot, watered with blood every day, gradually became more vibrant. The twig began to sprout the first buds of leaves and flowers. The 2 pieces of white cloth covering the 2 ends of the thorns had also been removed by her. Upon observation, she noticed that these thorns were slightly larger than the one broken by Huyết. Tuyết Dung now remembered back on the bus when she realized that if Huyết hadn't broken the thorn, she might have had a more miraculous wish by now. While Tuyết Dung was enjoying her seemingly heavenly days thanks to the blood orchid, Huyết was going through a period of extreme suffering. Since the day she returned with Tuyết Dung, Huyết had always been tired and lethargic. At first, for 2 or 3 days, nothing seemed unusual. But then, consecutive days brought about pain and discomfort in the area of her fingertip, where she had been pierced by the thorn of the blood orchid. Initially, it was just a small puncture wound, slightly bleeding, so Huyết simply fixed it with her personal adhesive bandage. But as the days went by, the wound spread as if it were necrotic, and a yellowish fluid mixed with blood oozed out, soaking through the adhesive bandage, causing her unbearable itching. However, Huyết only thought that she had exerted her finger too much, causing the fresh blood to ooze out like that. Besides, She didn't feel much pain, so she just casually bandaged it up without realizing that this small needle-sized wound was the first warning sign of the most horrifying events happening to her. After completing their essays at school, both Tuyết Dung and Huyết were given a week off. Normally, during this time, Huyết would go home or visit Tuyết Dung's boarding house to hang out, but an incident occurred that forced Huyết to stay at her own boarding house. That day, while she was peeling off the personal adhesive bandage from her fingertip, she was horrified to discover that her finger had swollen like a betel nut, and the flesh inside was oozing out a foul-smelling, slimy substance. Huyết was terrified. She sat helplessly on the ground, staring at her finger, attracting swarms of flies and mosquitoes. Then, trying to regain her composure, she hastily rushed to the nearest hospital. The doctors and nurses furrowed their brows, partly because it had been a long time since someone with necrosis of the finger had come for examination, partly due to the putrid, nauseating smell emanating from the decayed finger. After a thorough examination, the doctors concluded that her finger was severely infected due to lack of proper hygiene and had necrosed more than half. But what frightened Huyết more than anything was when the doctor firmly stated that the finger could not be saved, and only surgery to amputate it could potentially save her hand. Huyết was distraught. Where would she get the money for surgery? All the money her parents sent her monthly for living expenses had been spent on the trip with Tuyết Dung that day. And even if she underwent surgery, how would she explain to her parents and friends about her amputated finger? What would her future hold, especially in an industry that emphasized appearance so much? Huyết burst into tears. The doctors could only console her, expressing regret that a young girl like her had to undergo surgery to amputate a body part due to an unwarranted cause. Suddenly, Huyết thought back. This was all because of Tuyết Dung's dry twig that caused her to end up in this misery. She decided to find Tuyết Dung and have a talk. Hatred was brewing in her mind, even though she knew deep down that she was the one inadvertently pierced by the thorn due to her own carelessness. Huyết didn't utter another word as she wiped her tears and left the hospital. She immediately went back to her boarding house, took her electric scooter, and headed straight to Tuyết Dung's place to seek answers. Fearful that Tuyết Dung might avoid her if she called in advance, Huyết decided to head there directly without informing her beforehand. By now, the sky had darkened, and the road to Tuyết Dung's boarding house was about 5 kilometers from Huyet's place. Yet, Huyết had been traveling for nearly an hour and still hadn't reached her destination. The road she took today seemed endlessly long, with no signs of any passers-by or vehicles. Feeling lost amidst the deserted streets shrouded in thick tree canopies, Huyết shivered not from the cold, but from an invisible fear that overshadowed the pain in her decaying finger. Occasionally, gusts of wind blew through the branches, causing them to rustle against each other, sounding like the lament of lost souls in the depths of hell, echoing through the eerie darkness. Suddenly, she saw a figure standing under the streetlight ahead. The light from her electric scooter wasn't enough to illuminate the person's face, only revealing a slender figure, tall and thin, clinging to the traffic pole as if about to collapse. Huyết felt very uneasy, especially since the traffic light had turned red, meaning she had to stop right where the figure was clinging to the pole. Alone on this quiet night, encountering such a scene was extremely unfortunate. She didn't know if the person was good or bad, if they were a good Samaritan or a thief, or worse, encountering such a situation could mean risking her entire youth. Finally, Huyet had to wait for the red light. As she got closer, she noticed that the person seemed to be struggling, clinging to the traffic pole to support their weight and prevent themselves from falling. It was unclear if the person was a man or a woman. All she could hear was a cough that sounded like a funeral bell tolling for the departed soul. Thuyen was sweating with fear, but she was quick-witted. She took out her phone and put it to her ear, pretending to talk to her father. "Dad, yes, I'm waiting for the red light. Yes, Dad, I see you're here. I know, Dad." After finishing her little performance, as if her father had come to pick her up, Thuyen put the phone back in her pocket, pretending it had run out of battery. She had mentally prepared herself. If the person came towards her with ill intentions, she would surrender her scooter and her phone as a decoy. Yet all the negative thoughts about the person vanished before Thuyen's eyes. They didn't do anything to her. The traffic light was about to turn green. She gripped the throttle tightly, waiting for the red light to change, then revved the scooter to move forward. But just then, the person turned to face her. Their neck twisted 180 degrees to stare directly at Thuyen. Thuyen screamed in terror, so scared that she and her scooter fell to the ground. The flickering light from the scooter's headlamp illuminated the figure before her, causing Thuyen to panic. Their body twisted like a branch, their grayish-green skin devoid of life. But the most horrifying thing was their face, covered in countless pustules bursting open as if something parasitic was breaking through the skin, and numerous black thorns covering almost their entire visage. "Help! Is anyone there? Help me, please!" Thuyen cried out, crawling backward while sobbing uncontrollably, desperately searching for someone to help her overcome this perilous situation. The creature approached Thuyen, its rotten teeth bared, saliva dripping as if it wanted to devour her alive. "Who gave you the right to interfere with me, huh? Who gave you permission?" The creature's ominous voice growled from its mouth. Thuyen, tears streaming down her face, clasped her hands together, pleading, "I don't know anything. I didn't harm anyone." The creature lunged forward, grabbing Thuyen's decaying finger and bringing it to its nose, smelling the putrid odor of decay as if it were sniffing a dead body. Thuyen screamed in horror, nearly fainting. Just then, the headlights of a passing truck illuminated the scene, and the creature vanished as if it had never existed. Thuyen breathed heavily, fortunate that a passerby had rescued her from the clutches of death. It seemed like she had been saved by the truck's headlights, but no, the truck sped away as if there were no one on the road. The driver was intoxicated, unable to see clearly, oblivious to the fact that there was a girl lying sprawled on the road, victimized by some supernatural force. And then, as fate would have it, this morning, the news media reported that a female student had tragically passed away at a red light intersection. The cause was the intoxicated truck driver, unable to control the speed, resulting in the tragic death of the unlucky student, Thuyen. Upon hearing the news of her friend's passing, Tuyết Dung was stunned into silence, unable to believe the truth that her closest friend, with whom she had recently gone on a trip to take photos, was now lying in the cold morgue. Later, Thuyen's parents also arrived at the hospital to claim their daughter's body and took her back to their hometown for burial. The entire Thuyen's family plunged into a deep, dark abyss, torn apart by the loss of their daughter, barely in her 20s, who was now laid to rest in eternal sleep. Tuyết Dung was also present among the funeral procession. Along the way, she kept pondering over the death of her closest friend. Thuyen's remains were buried in her hometown cemetery. Looking at the photo on the newly erected tombstone filled everyone in the funeral procession with indescribable sorrow. A young girl with dreams and aspirations for the future, now lying in the cold, desolate ground, despite her body being slowly consumed by time. Tuyết Dung stood, gazing at Thuyen's photo on the gravestone, her heart filled with unbearable grief, her eyes swollen from crying too much. Suddenly, the photo on the tombstone twisted as if the space was warped, and Thuyan's smiling face on the picture underwent a strange transformation. Blood trickled from her eyes, and Thuyan, crying, screamed loudly, "It's all your fault. It's because of you that I'm dead." Tuyết Dung let out a shriek and collapsed to the ground, startling everyone around the funeral procession. She looked back, and the photo on Thuyan's tombstone was still normal, her smiling face unchanged. When asked what was wrong, Tuyết Dung could only reply that she felt a bit dizzy and tired. After that, she asked Thuyan's family for permission and returned to her dormitory. Lying on her bed, Tuyết Dung shivered, recalling what happened to Thuyan's photo on the tombstone. She felt as if Thuyan was implying that she had caused her death. Had Thuyan touched Huyết Anh Ngải and been killed by it? Yes! A jolt of realization struck Tuyết Dung. Thuyan was the one who broke one of the thorns of Huyết Anh Ngải that day. The man's words were true. Never harm the Ngải branch. Perhaps it was Thuyan's unintentional act of breaking the branch that angered Huyết Anh Ngải and directly caused her death. Tuyết Dung's spine chilled, sweat beading on her forehead uncontrollably. She hadn't realized Huyết Anh Ngải was so terrifying. She resolved to be extremely careful in caring for this Ngải branch from now on. Suddenly, Tuyết Dung had a crazy idea. What if she tried to plead with Huyết Anh Ngải to help Thuyan come back to life? But immediately, Tuyết Dung dismissed this idea. Firstly, bringing the dead back to life was an extremely difficult wish, requiring a certain amount of blood to be provided to Huyết Anh Ngải. And of course, animal blood at this point would not suffice. Human blood would be needed. Tuyết Dung knew she couldn't obtain human blood. Going to blood donation centers would not work. She would be investigated immediately for illegal blood trading. Secondly, Thuyan's body was crushed beyond recognition by the truck. Even if Huyết Anh Ngải were to bring her back to life, she would only be a grotesque zombie. Thinking of this, Tuyết Dung shuddered, recalling the undead creatures from horror movies. Afterwards, she shook her head and sighed. Perhaps it was best to let her friend rest in peace. Over time, the death of Thuyan gradually faded into the past. Tuyết Dung, thanks to Huyết Anh Ngải, achieved many successes. She continuously excelled in her studies, becoming an outstanding young student at the school, honored with scholarships, promising a bright future. Not only that, in addition to her class hours, she also earned money through online sales on social media platforms. Of course, with the help of Huyết Anh Ngải, her business thrived. The money she earned not only covered her tuition fees and daily expenses, but also allowed her to send some back home to help her parents. Tuyết Dung thought her peaceful and prosperous life would continue, but she was unaware of the dark clouds of disaster and tragedy slowly looming over her fate. More than 2 months since Tuyết Dung nurtured Huyết Anh Ngải, her life had improved significantly. Trips to dance bars until dawn or fancy coffee shops for trendy photo shoots with friends became as common as daily meals for her. She gradually became accustomed to the lifestyle of the rich and famous in the bustling urban areas, buying herself luxury items such as clothes, handbags, cosmetics, things she had never dared to dream of before. Nam is a tall, handsome student, the most outstanding in Tuyết Dung's class. He not only excels academically, but also is kind, outgoing, and comes from a wealthy family, yet he doesn't flaunt his status. It can be said that Nam is a role model that any girl would be mesmerized by, and of course, Tuyết Dung is one of them. Secretly admiring her classmate for a long time, Tuyết Dung had only exchanged a few casual words with Nam about class matters, never really engaging in a conversation with him for more than 5 minutes. Simply put, If beautiful girls or the daughters of affluent families haven't caught Nam's attention, how could a girl with average looks like Tuyết Dung stand a chance? But now things are different. Tuyết Dung has Huyết Anh Ngải in her hands, and she wants something she doesn't have. Tuyết Dung wants to be the class beauty. She wants Nam to notice her and go further with his feelings for her. Thinking it through, the next day after finishing the morning class, Tuyết Dung went to the market and bought 3 bottles of pig blood. Back in her dorm room, she hurriedly poured all 3 bottles of pig blood into the basin for Huyết Anh Ngải. Tuyết Dung's eyes now displayed clear signs of ambition and fanaticism. She wanted to become beautiful. She wanted her beauty to shine brilliantly like no one else's. As usual, when bathed in blood, Huyết Anh Ngải fervently absorbed it, and the dried branches that were once there now turned into a strange black-purple hue. By the name of Tuyết Dung, born under the Ngải spirit on the 13th of July lunar calendar, I have completed the blood offering, beseeching the spirit of Ngải to fulfill my wishes. After completing her invocation, Tuyết Dung waited for a moment, then took out her mirror to check, only to be stunned. There was no change at all. Her face remained the same. Her beauty had not progressed an inch. Huyết Anh Ngải refused to help her achieve what she desired. But Tuyết Dung quickly deduced that her wish this time might have been too high, so the pig's blood had no effect. Now, only human blood would do for Huyết Anh Ngải to accept her plea. At this moment, Tuyết Dung's mind was clouded like someone lost in the fog, her desire for beauty like a specter haunting her young mind. Tuyết Dung then went into the kitchen, took out a fruit knife, and made a cut on the palm of her hand. She gritted her teeth against the pain, and blood trickled down into Huyết Anh Ngải basin, causing it to undergo strange transformations. For the first time, Tuyết Dung witnessed one of the thorned branches of the Ngải plant blooming into a mysterious black flower. It seemed that Huyết Anh Ngải had accepted her plea, bathed in human blood. But at this moment, Tuyết Dung felt very tired and somewhat dizzy from the blood loss. She quickly bandaged her wound and climbed into bed, falling asleep immediately. The next day, when Tuyết Dung went to school, she entered the classroom with a fresh and cheerful face. What surprised her was that all her classmates looked at her with great admiration. At first, Tuyết Dung thought that maybe she hadn't washed her face properly today, which was why her classmates were staring at her so intently. But when she looked at her phone's front camera, she didn't see anything on her face. Of course, Huyết Anh Ngải had transformed her appearance, making her look like herself, but with perfect facial features. It was unbelievable that after just one night, Tuyết Dung had gone from being an ordinary girl to the center of attention, especially with Nam also looking at her with great admiration. Tuyết Dung's beauty and charm captivated Nam, causing him to spend the entire class gazing at her. Never before had Nam seen Tuyết Dung looking this beautiful. As the class ended, Nam took the initiative to approach Tuyết Dung and struck up a conversation. Naturally, Tuyết Dung was joyous and enthusiastic in her response. Later, Nam suggested going for coffee, and she readily agreed. From that moment on, Nam and Tuyết Dung talked more, gradually evolving their relationship from friendship to love without even realizing it. Nam was so enamored with her that he rented an apartment for them to live together, and after a while, they decided to take their relationship to the next level and get married. Spoiled and cherished by her boyfriend, Tuyết Dung now felt like the luckiest person in the world. She wanted something, and she got it. She even felt like she was a modern-day princess. But that beautiful period didn't last long before something happened to Tuyết Dung, almost causing her to collapse. Since she and Nam started dating, Tuyết Dung had almost forgotten about taking care of Huyết Anh Ngải. That night, while washing her face before bed, Tuyết Dung was startled when she looked into the mirror and saw a horrifying sight. One side of her face had sagged. From her cheek up to her eyelid were wrinkles and blackheads. She cried out in dismay, clutching her face and stumbling to the ground. Thinking she might be mistaken, Tuyết Dung rubbed her eyes, but the reflection in the mirror remained the same, still a half-aged face like that of an 80-year-old woman. Why was this happening? Tuyết Dung, still bewildered, was interrupted by a knock on the bathroom door and Nam's concerned voice. "Dung, are you okay?" Trying to compose herself, Tuyết Dung didn't want Nam to see her horrifying face, so she hesitated before replying. Nothing, dear. Just a cockroach scared me." Nam stood outside, his voice echoing in, "Gave me a scare. Hurry up and wash your face. It's bedtime. I'll wait." After he finished speaking, Nam went back to his room. Waiting until Nam's footsteps faded away, Tuyết Dung reluctantly got up. She didn't want to look in the mirror anymore. That was the face of a monster, not a human. Suddenly, Tuyết Dung remembered that for almost a month since moving in with Nam, she had forgotten about Huyết Anh Ngải. Afraid of arousing Nam's suspicion, she had left Huyết Anh Ngải on the balcony and lied, saying it was a pot of herbal plants. During that time, she hadn't been able to feed Huyết Anh Ngải with blood. If Nam found out she was using this demonic thing to manipulate his love, he would surely kick her out of this relationship. After some contemplation, Tuyết Dung wrapped a thin cloth around to cover the unsightly wrinkles on one side of her face and calmly returned to bed. Seeing his girlfriend lying with her back to him, Nam cuddled up beside her and whispered in her ear, "What's wrong? Are you upset with me today?" Tuyết Dung sighed and replied, "No, I'm just a little tired today. Let me rest for a while." Tuyết Dung's attitude surprised Nam a bit because normally they would embrace each other affectionately while sleeping. Nevertheless, Nam didn't dwell on it too much. He carefully pulled the blanket over Tuyết Dung and closed his eyes to sleep. Lying on her side, Tuyết Dung deduced that the reason for the odd appearance of one side of her face was due to Huyết Anh Ngải. It seemed like a warning to Tuyết Dung that if she didn't continue to care for Huyết Anh Ngải with blood, things would worsen. Thuy An's death only intensified Tuyết Dung's fear. She couldn't go against Huyết Anh Ngải will. The next morning, Tuyết Dung intentionally woke up earlier than Nam and locked herself in the bathroom. When it was time for school, Nam called, but Tuyết Dung told him she was feeling a bit unwell and wanted to skip class. Sensing something was off with his girlfriend, Nam kept asking if she was okay, but Tuyết Dung insisted that she was fine, claiming she was experiencing menstrual cramps. Hearing this, Nam gave her some advice and left the apartment. As soon as Nam left, Tuyết Dung hurriedly emerged from the bathroom, quickly dressed in conservative clothes, put on a mask and glasses, and then went to the market to buy pig's blood. Returning home with 2 warm plastic bottles of pig's blood, Tuyết Dung hastily took them out onto the balcony and poured them into the basin of Huyết Anh Ngải. However, things didn't go as Tuyết Dung expected. The pig's blood overflowed from the basin and spilled onto the floor, emitting a strong, unpleasant smell. Huyết Anh Ngải refused to accept the pig's blood. All the blood Tuyết Dung poured in was rejected. Why? Why is this happening? Tuyết Dung's face turned pale. If Huyết Anh Ngải didn't absorb the blood, it meant that the unsightly side of her face couldn't be regenerated. Tuyết Dung breathed heavily. Her eyes suddenly blurred. Her ears rang like a train whistle, and then from some distant realm came a voice, extremely cold and eerie. Human blood. It has to be human blood. Tuyết Dung jolted awake. It was crystal clear now. Huyết Anh Ngải was reminding her that from now on, she couldn't care for it with animal blood anymore. Only human blood would suffice. Tuyết Dung bit her lip, regret starting to set in. If only she hadn't cut her own blood for Huyết Anh Ngải that day, it wouldn't have become accustomed to the scent of human blood. Everything was spiraling out of control, and she had no choice but to temporarily endure the pain of cutting of blood from her palm and pouring it onto Huyết Anh Ngải. The greedy tendrils of Ngải eagerly drank every drop of Tuyết Dung's blood until she felt a bit dizzy. Then she hastily bandaged the wound again. Afterward, she looked into the mirror. The wrinkles and acne had improved somewhat, but if she compared both sides of her face, there was still a significant difference. Tuyết Dung felt despondent. She really didn't want to go out and meet anyone now. Finally, the grotesque transformation of Tuyết Dung's half-face became too conspicuous to hide from Nam. Initially, Nam wanted to take her to various cosmetic surgery clinics to reshape her face, but Tuyết Dung disagreed, claiming it was just a slight skin allergy that would heal. But deep down, Tuyết Dung knew this was caused by Huyết Anh Ngải, and even cosmetic surgery wouldn't make a difference. Moreover, if she defied Huyết Anh Ngải punishment, she would end up like Tuyên, suffering the most painful and cruel death. In the following days, Tuyết Dung felt Nam's love for her fading away. Sometimes, Nam only returned to their rented apartment 2 or 3 times a week, claiming he was busy with internship work on other days. Nam also stopped paying much attention to Tuyết Dung. Whenever she wanted to go out with him, he always made excuses to reject her. Tuyết Dung was becoming more and more depressed. Her first love was likely crumbling. That evening, Tuyết Dung was standing in a supermarket, picking out groceries. Today, she would cook some delicious dishes to reignite the flame with Nam. Tuyết Dung was wearing a long outfit and a tightly sealed mask, just like every other day since the day half of her face became disfigured. Engrossed in choosing groceries, Tuyết Dung suddenly spotted a familiar figure standing at the counter on the other side. It was none other than Nam, accompanied by a young woman in a short dress who was acting coy. "Come on, let's go down there, have some ice cream, and then watch a movie." Nam's voice sounded like he was coaxing the young girl. "No, today you have to take me shopping until evening," the young girl next to Nam pouted, clearly upset. "All right, be good, my darling." Nam's voice wasn't too loud, but it was enough for Tuyết Dung to hear. Her heart tightened. Tears had been streaming down her face unnoticed, and the bag she was carrying slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. Then, Tuyết Dung knew everything. Nam had betrayed her. The love she had cherished for so long suddenly turned to dust. Nam stood opposite the counter, gently caressing the face of the girl in front of him, his gestures tender and affectionate, like a couple deeply in love. To make matters worse, the moment later shattered Tuyết Dung completely. The girl wrapped her arm around Nam's and they walked away, Nam smiling and saying, "My good girl, tomorrow we'll go pick out engagement rings, okay?" Like a bolt from the blue, bitterness choked Tuyết Dung's throat. Her eyes welled up with tears, her cheeks flushed with anguish. She stood there, transfixed, watching the two of them cuddle and stroll affectionately. Her heart torn to pieces. A flame of hatred suddenly ignited. At this moment, she just wanted to rush over and slap Nam a few times for daring to betray her, or even use the fruit knife displayed on the counter to give each of them a few stabs to relieve her anger. But Tuyết Dung still held on to her sanity. She raised her hand to wipe away the last tear, crying for the treacherous man. Calmly, she took out her phone, dialed Nam's number and called. "Nam, where are you? I cooked some dishes you like today." Before Tuyết Dung could finish her sentence, Nam's line on the other end cut off. "Enough. I don't need to cook anything anymore. I think we should break up. I can't keep living with someone as ugly and conservative as you. Do you know that your other half has been smelling foul these days? I really can't stand it anymore. Let's end this, Dung. As for the apartment I rented, you can stay if you want, as long as you pay the rent to the landlord every month. That's fine. I'm busy. Click. Name's abrupt hang-up echoed through Tuyết Dung's phone, her eyes still fixed on the couple in front of her. She could still hear a few mocking remarks about Nam's and the other girl's appearance. Clenching her fists tightly, Tuyết Dung swallowed her burning anger and frustration and headed straight back to the apartment. That night, Tuyết Dung drank quite a lot of beer. Normally, a girl like her would be knocked out after just one can, but today, perhaps the pain of being cheated on made her forget how to get drunk. Tuyết Dung's hair was disheveled, her eyes bloodshot with pain, amidst the clutter of empty beer cans in the room. She couldn't believe that the person who once promised to be with her forever would betray her like this. Tuyết Dung was emotionally wounded, her mind clouded by despair. She stumbled into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and brought it to her wrist. She would end it all because her life had no meaning anymore, just endless torment and self-inflicted misery. Yes, I can't give up. Why would I choose to end my life because of that jerk? Have I ever felt pain? Hurt at the thought of my parents before? Only to now do something foolish to free myself because of him? Tuyết Dung brought the blood lotus pot in from the balcony, and she fed it a little blood from her palm. She was so bloodless that her memory decreased, forgetting why she had placed the pot of blood lotus here. Since raising the blood lotus with her own blood, Tuyết Dung had visibly lost weight, and no matter how much she ate, it was not enough to feed the plant. In a state of trance, the familiar cold and ominous voice echoed to awaken Tuyết Dung. Needs the blood of a newborn. The one who betrays you will have to pay a heavy price. You will have everything you want. Tuyết Dung heard every word echoing clearly in her ears. She looked at the pot of blood lotus in horror. Its bloodthirst grew day by day, and now it even demanded the blood of newborns. Tuyết Dung was so frightened that she clenched her fists, not knowing where to find newborns to draw blood from. Killing a newborn to feed the lotus? Would she still be human then? Thinking so, Tuyết Dung shook her head, murmuring, "No, I can't do this. It's too cruel." The surrounding space chilled visibly. The eerie voice responded to her with a tempting tone. Would you rather see your loved one fall into someone else's hands? Look, you sacrificed half of your face just for him. After all the things you've done, aren't they all for him? The eerie, mesmerizing voice momentarily ignited the hatred within Tuyết Dung. She gritted her teeth, tears streaming down her cheeks. The image of Nam and his lover appeared in her mind like a sinister tumor. Yes, Tuyết Dung didn't want this. Nam had to be hers alone. No one else could take him away from her life. But Nam was the one who betrayed her, thrusting a large horn into her. Tuyết Dung had to seek revenge. If she couldn't have Nam, no one else could dream of having him either. Tuyết Dung, her hair disheveled, stood up, glaring at the blood lotus pot. Rest assured, blood lotus, I will provide newborn blood for you. She went inside, tied her hair neatly, dressed modestly, then she sped away from the apartment. Arriving at Street 7, she slowed down, searching for a clandestine private clinic hidden behind several high-rise buildings. This place was where girls in distress, or those who wanted to have children by choice of gender, would abort. They were willing to give up their flesh and blood, depriving innocent lives of the right to live in this world. Knocking on the door 3 times, a doctor in a white blouse and a face mask opened the door. Seeing Tuyết Dung standing there, he immediately asked, "How many months pregnant are you?" Assuming Tuyết Dung was there for an abortion, the doctor asked casually. Tuyết Dung, unfazed, replied, "I'm not pregnant. I'm here to buy a fetus." Upon hearing her response, the doctor was taken aback. wary that law enforcement might be involved. He waved his hand, saying, "Nonsense, this is a clinic, not a black market. Please leave." He reached to close the door, but Tuyết Dung stopped him, pulling out a stack of new, crisp polymer bills from her pocket, saying, "I'm serious. Is this enough?" Seeing the stack of money, the doctor's eyes lit up. Then he glanced around, fearing someone might be watching. He glanced at Tuyết Dung and said in a low voice, "All right, come in." The doctor was very cautious, questioning her several times to ensure she had no legal affiliation. Then he went inside and took out a black nylon bag, feeling cold to the touch. Tuyết Dung guessed he had just taken it out from a refrigerated chamber. The doctor said, "There are no live fetuses, only dead ones. This is a 6-month-old fetus extracted from someone who came here for an abortion. Take a look." Recognizing the contents of the black nylon bag as a dead fetus, Tuyết Dung felt a chill run down her spine, her hands trembling as she opened the bag. The fetus had already taken human form, yet someone callously discarded their flesh and blood. It was truly heartless. The sight of the lifeless fetus made Tuyết Dung shudder. She quickly wrapped the nylon bag back up and handed it to the doctor along with a sum of money. Before leaving, the doctor asked, "I'm a bit curious. What are you buying this fetal corpse for? Not for some witchcraft, is it?" The doctor hit Tuyết Dung's dark heart with his words, making her slightly uncomfortable. "It's none of your business. The transaction is done. I'm leaving." Before stepping out the door, Tuyết Dung thought for a moment, then said to the doctor, "I might come back next time." The doctor replied, "I'm not sure what your intentions are, but don't use these fetal corpses for witchcraft. These dead fetuses were already denied the privilege of life in this world. They will resent you for it." Hearing this, Tuyết Dung chuckled derisively. "Thank you for the reminder, but you're also enabling these actions," Tuyết Dung retorted before slamming the door shut and leaving. The doctor slumped into his chair, a bitter smile playing on his lips. Indeed, how could he advise others when he himself was involved in such deeds? Taking the fetal corpse back to her apartment, Tuyết Dung left it outside to thaw. She assumed it was already dead, but there was still some blood left in its body. After waiting for it to soften slightly, Tuyết Dung placed the fetus into the blood orchid pot, along with a photo of Nam, murmuring, "As Tuyết Dung, born on the 13th of the 7th lunar month under the Ngải year, completes this blood offering, I beseech the blood orchid spirit to afflict the betrayer with 100-fold torment, a life worse than death." With these final words growled out with the utmost resentment of a betrayed woman, the blood orchid suddenly burst open its last thorn, its branches turning a sinister black. It extended its small branches, piercing through the fetal corpse beside it. The next scene made Tuyết Dung's hair stand on end. The fetus was gradually drained of its blood and flesh, shriveling until only a small white skeleton remained. The blood orchid accepted her plea. The wish had been cast. Now only the outcome awaited. As for Nam, after ending an intimate day with Huyên, his new lover, he returned home with a heavy heart. Seeing his son come home, Nam's parents inquired, to which he casually replied that the apartment he rented was deteriorating and he didn't want to stay there anymore. Using the excuse of convenience for study groups, Nam had told his parents he wanted to rent a place closer to school. Being wealthy parents, they didn't think twice about renting their son a luxury apartment near the school, unaware that it was where Nam and Tuyết Dung had been living together. It was almost midnight, and Nam couldn't close his eyes. He kept reassuring himself that he had done nothing wrong in this matter. Every day, coming back to that apartment and seeing Tuyết Dung's contorted, acne-ridden face made Nam feel nauseous. He shuddered at the thought of kissing Tuyết Dung tenderly. Nam lay on the bed, sighing deeply, feeling completely justified in his decision to break up with Tuyết Dung. The clock struck 2 in the morning, and Nam turned towards the window. Suddenly, he jolted in shock because right outside the window, clinging to the window bars, was a slender white figure, contorted with a bizarrely large head. Its hair hung loose, unable to cover its face, which was adorned with sharp, overlapping spikes, as dark as freshly dug earth, and its mouth gaped wide, revealing a set of jagged, foaming fangs. Nam screamed in horror, stumbling and falling to the floor. Hearing his son's cry, Nam's parents hurried to his room to see what was happening. Nam struggled to point towards the window, stammering, "Mom, Dad, ghost! There's a ghost!" However, when all three looked out the window, there was nothing but empty window bars. Nam's father scowled at him. "What's wrong, Nam? Were you dreaming?" Rubbing his eyes as if to prove what he had seen was real, Nam quickly explained, "No, Dad, Mom, there really was a ghost. Clearly, a ghost with a large head and many spikes." Before Nam could finish his sentence, his mother shook her head. "You're almost 20, but you act like a child. Were you playing some kind of game with your friends in that apartment again, messing with your mind?" Nam shook his head firmly. "Mom, I've always been obedient and well-behaved. I've never touched any of those things." Nam's father waved his hand dismissively. "Forget it. Go to bed. It doesn't matter." With that, both parents returned to their room. Nam spent the entire night closing the window tightly, turning on all the lights in his room, and nodding off intermittently until morning. However, Nam didn't realize that the fall from the bed to the floor had left his hand scratched. Normally, such a minor wound would heal in a few days for an average person, but for Nam, it would be the beginning of the disaster he was about to face. A few days later, Nam no longer saw the terrifying image he had witnessed that night, and he had returned to his normal life. He still went to school as usual, but when it came to Tuyết Dung, he didn't even bother to look at her, treating her like a stranger. After school, he would meet up with Huyên, his new girlfriend, and be so engrossed in their relationship that he forgot all about the scratch on his arm. One day, when Nam returned home from school, he undressed to take a shower. Standing in front of the mirror, he suddenly felt a chill, as if someone was breathing down his neck. He glanced at the mirror and froze in horror, his face turning pale, as he saw a white figure with a large, menacing head standing behind him. When Nam turned around, there was nothing there, making him wonder if he was just too haunted by the ghost from the window the other day, causing him to hallucinate. Nam took a deep breath to calm himself, but suddenly panicked as he noticed the small wound on his arm spreading inexplicably. What was once a minor scratch now seemed to be festering deep into his skin, revealing strands of muscle and blood vessels intertwined. Occasionally, a yellow-green pus oozed from the wound, emitting a foul, putrid odor reminiscent of decaying flesh. "Damn it, it's infected," Nam cursed, then poured some hydrogen peroxide from a bottle into the wound. The chemical solution sizzled and bubbled as it entered the wound, causing a stinging sensation akin to rubbing salt, making Nam grimace in pain, but refrain from crying out, lest his parents hear and fuss over him. After bandaging the wound carefully, he resumed his normal activities. 2 days later, Nam's mother, as usual, had prepared breakfast, but his father noticed that their son hadn't come down to eat. He asked, "Hey, did Nam oversleep again? Go check on him. We don't want him to be late for school." Nam's mother hurriedly went upstairs to Nam's bedroom, knocking on the door several times, but receiving no response from Nam. Suddenly feeling that something was wrong with her son, she rushed back downstairs to the kitchen, grabbed the spare set of keys, and exclaimed, "Oh my, I've been calling him and he's not answering. Oh dear, what if something's wrong with him?" Both parents quickly ran up to Nam's room. As they opened the door to Nam's room, they were hit by a foul stench. Nam was slumped over his desk, and when Nam's father went to shake him, he noticed that Nam's eyes were wide open, white with fear, and his mouth was foaming. His cheeks were bruised and sunken, adding to the horrifying expression as if he had witnessed something terrifying. His face was covered in red, swollen lumps like boils. The wound on his arm emitted a strong, putrid odor, with chunks of flesh, thick yellow-green pus, and wriggling worms, beetles crawling back and forth, making the scene even more gruesome. The strange thing was that the doctors discovered Nam was infected with a bacteria similar to a previous case they had examined, which was Thuong. Nam was admitted to the special care unit, and the doctors left with a solemn nod to Nam's parents. Well, I think the family should prepare themselves emotionally. Nam's parents leaned against the wall, silent. The family was allowed to visit Nam before the worst happened. Nam's parents couldn't hold back their tears as they lamented, "How could this happen to you, my child?" Nam, though unconscious, still sensed the pain within his consciousness. No one could bear seeing their helpless parents weeping over their own body. Nam's mother cried uncontrollably, her voice choked with emotion. "Nam, you have to live. You still have a future ahead of you." His mother's lamentations pierced Nam's heart like a knife. Even in his unconscious state, Nam could hear every heartbreaking word from his parents. Overwhelmed by pain and helplessness, Nam eventually breathed his last breath in the hospital. The happy future he dreamt of vanished in just a few short days. As for Uyên, Nam's new love interest, she was a pragmatic woman who only aimed for the wealth and career of Nam's family. After Nam's death, Uyên didn't even bother to visit or inquire. Instead, she clung to a drug-addicted man. Then one day, they found the body of a young woman lying dead by the roadside, none other than Uyên. Forensics determined her death was caused by a drug overdose. She had indulged to the point of being semi-conscious and threw herself into an electric pole, meeting a tragic end. The next day, Tuyết Dung heard the news that her betrayer, Nam, and his lover had met their tragic end. The hatred in her heart clouded her vision, transforming her completely from a gentle, obedient girl into a vengeful demon, borrowing invisible forces to mercilessly strike down her enemies. Tuyết Dung looked at the blood orchid pot with immense excitement. Perhaps she had officially become dependent on it. Every time she looked at the black and purple flower blooming from the thorny stem, it seemed to possess a sinister allure that compelled her to help it feed on blood every day. 2 weeks after avenging her grudge, Tuyết Dung suddenly had a terrifying nightmare one night. She found herself lost in a dense forest, surrounded by countless branches and vines with sharp thorns ready to pierce anyone who dared to approach. Tuyết Dung screamed at the top of her lungs, but there was no one around. Suddenly, she shuddered as she noticed several white figures hovering above her head. Then, Tuyết Dung turned around and was horrified to find Thuong, Nam, and his lover, Uyên, behind her. All three of them had grotesque faces, bald heads with sharp thorns sprouting from them, and they incessantly screamed at Tuyết Dung, their voices echoing like demons, torturing her in hell. "It's all because of you. Pay us back with your life." Tuyết Dung was terrified and almost collapsed to the ground, but the next moment made her even more horrified. From behind, a ghastly red figure with an umbilical cord dragging behind it was crawling towards her at an incredible speed, its mouth gaping black and its eyes filled with hatred. Without needing to ask, she knew it was the fetus she had sacrificed to the blood orchid, now returning to seek revenge. The eyes of the child were filled with intense malice as it stared at Tuyết Dung, as if questioning why she had cruelly offered its flesh to those demonic orchids for consumption. Standing on the brink of life and death, suddenly all four of those ghostly figures were sucked into a deep black hole behind them, from which emerged a white figure with a terrifyingly large head and countless thorns sprouting from it. Tuyết Dung couldn't recognize who it was, and the white figure spoke with a voice that was a disturbing mix of male and female. "Human woman, the blood orchid will not allow any spirit to haunt you, but in the days to come, the blood orchid requires the blood of a newborn to fulfill the desires of the blood ritual practitioner. In the next 3 days, if the blood orchid does not bathe in the blood of a living newborn, the practitioner will perish, never to be reincarnated." After speaking, the white figure turned into smoke and flew straight into Tuyết Dung. She woke up abruptly, feeling her body all over, relieved to find nothing wrong, just a nightmare. But at that moment, Tuyết Dung suddenly screamed because under her feet, she realized that the blood orchid pot had tipped over onto her legs and was sucking blood. Clearly, she had placed it in the corner of the room. So how did it move on its own from the corner to the foot of her bed to suck blood? Tuyết Dung immediately kicked the blood orchid pot aside, pulled the blanket tightly around her trembling body. A wound, like a needle prick, appeared on her calf, identical to the wound Thuan had suffered before. She began to feel cold, and as she pondered, there was a knock on the door. "Dung, what's wrong?" It turned out that some friends from the neighboring dorm heard her screaming and came over to check on her. Tuyết Dung hesitantly replied, "Oh, it's nothing, just a mouse in my room." From outside came another voice. "Wow, you screamed like that just for a mouse? Let us sleep, will you?" Afterwards, none of Tuyết Dung's roommates knew how terrifying her experience had been. Now, Tuyết Dung understood how terrifying the blood orchid was. The strange man had given her a sinister plant, and despite protecting her from the ghosts of Thuan, Nam, Uyên, and the baby, it was too late for regret. Within the next 3 days, how could she find the blood of a living newborn to feed the orchid? If not, like Thuang or Nam, she would have to endure a most cruel and agonizing death for failing to fulfill the blood orchid's bloodthirsty desires. The night seemed to stretch on for centuries, and Tuyết Dung couldn't close her eyes. She kept imagining that if she relaxed for just a moment, the blood orchid would crawl over to drain her blood whenever it pleased. The blood orchid had officially possessed her. If she dared to discard it or burn it, the vengeful demon would kill her. By morning, Tuyết Dung's eyes were sunken from lack of sleep. She called her friend to ask the lecturer for permission to miss a class. She racked her brains trying to figure out how to escape this terrifying entity. Perhaps there was still some humanity left in her, urging her not to commit the sinful act of taking the blood of a living newborn to feed the blood orchid. Suddenly, Tuyết Dung felt a dampness on her leg, even though it wasn't her menstrual period. She lifted her pants to find, to her horror, that the wound inflicted by the blood orchid the night before had become a gaping hole. The wound was expanding, oozing a dark red color, extremely painful to the touch, and accompanied by yellow-green pus with an extremely foul odor. Tuyết Dung was horrified. The blood orchid was forcing her onto the path of demons with this wound. What should she do now? Did she have to kidnap a living newborn and kill it to feed the orchid? No, she was still human. She still had a conscience. If she met the blood orchid's demands, who knew how many innocent lives it would demand in the future? Tuyết Dung paced back and forth in her room, her heart burning like fire. She truly didn't know how to escape the blood orchid's possession. After struggling with her thoughts for a while, Tuyết Dung decided she would seek out a shaman to destroy the orchid. Only then could she escape from the blood orchid. After asking around the neighborhood, Tuyết Dung found a renowned shaman in the outskirts, about 20 kilometers from where she lived. Following the address given to her, she arrived at a small house with a tiled roof, emitting the scent of incense from the altar inside. Taking a deep breath, Tuyết Dung knocked on the door and entered. Master Phúc, now over 50 years old, wore a dark brown suit with a few strands of silver hair adorning his otherwise balding head. His face exuded a stern and resolute demeanor. With decades of experience in the profession, Master Phúc could see through Tuyết Dung immediately and pronounced, "The deathly aura is too strong, young lady. You have a great calamity ahead of you." Before Tuyết Dung could even introduce herself, she couldn't hide her fear upon hearing Master Phúc words. She clasped her hands together and pleaded, "Master, if you know, please guide and help me. I beg you to save me." Master Phúc narrowed his eyes, vaguely sensing what was happening. However, to confirm his suspicions, he said, "All right, now tell me the whole story." Tuyết Dung swallowed nervously and began recounting every detail, from the moment she received the blood orchid from the mysterious man to the incident where it killed someone. Since this matter concerned her life, Tuyết Dung didn't omit any details. After hearing her out, Master Phúc furrowed his brows and shook his head. "You're young, but your actions have created heavy karma. I fear." Before Master Phúc could finish, Tuyết Dung fell to her knees, crying, "Master, I caused the death of others. I will repent sincerely. I beg you to save me. I don't want to die." Master Phúc tone suddenly became stern. "So if someone kills you, does that mean they can repent too?" With a sigh, Master Phúc continued, "Your actions have consequences, and now you must face them. But show me the orchid you're seeking. If possible, I'll help." Tuyết Dung cried tears of joy, took out her phone, and showed Master Phúc the photos she had taken of the blood orchid. After examining them, a look of fear crossed the old man's face, and he muttered, "It is indeed the blood orchid, one of the 10 most poisonous orchids in the forbidden legends of the Northwest." Seeing Tuyết Dung's bewilderment, Master Phúc handed her the phone back, took a sip of the cooled tea, and began to speak slowly. The people of the Northwest mountains and forests have long used many types of orchids for highly effective medical purposes. However, some orchids born of heaven and earth are embodiments of demons, not allowing humans the right to know about them. In the past, I followed a wizard and heard him tell the forbidden legends of the Northwest, which include 10 extremely poisonous orchids. I only remember a few of them: Celestial Spirit Orchid, Demon Soul Orchid, Virgin Orchid, Divine Eye Orchid. Among them, the most special is the Blood Orchid. Those who practice wicked orchid cultivation will deceive and sell the orchid to unsuspecting people like you. After the orchid is empowered by the blood of certain individuals during the blood ritual, it will kill the one who seeks it. By then, the evil spirit inside the orchid will be released, and the sorcerer who cultivated the orchid will summon it to serve his nefarious purposes. Tuyết Dung, after hearing this, was so scared that her face drained of blood. Master Phúc looked at her with disappointment. Blood orchid, as its name suggests, blood refers to blood, an refers to the fetus, the embryo. You have almost fully performed the blood ritual, and your life is hanging by a thread. It's no wonder the deathly aura is so strong. Tuyết Dung knelt before Master Phúc, lifted her pants leg to show him the wound, now gaping like a chicken egg, and cried uncontrollably, "Master, please save me. I'm still young. I don't want to die." Master Phúc observed the wound, which had begun to decay into festering flesh mixed with green and red pus, along with a cloudy white fluid resembling rice water. With compassion and a sense of duty, the kind-hearted master couldn't bear to see the girl in front of him suffering, even though she was paying the price for her sinful actions. After thinking for a while, Master Fook made a decision. I'm not sure if I can suppress the blood orchid, but I'll try to help you. Master Fook went into the inner room and brought out an old book, its pages yellowed and worn by time. Carefully flipping to the required page, he read each word on the page. Tuyết Dung looked on curiously, but she couldn't understand as the text seemed to be in the ancient language of some ethnic group. After a while, Master Fook returned to the main altar, lit 3 incense sticks, and began chanting solemnly. Then he took a small yellow cloth bag from the altar, hanging from a string adorned with a mysterious green gemstone, and instructed. The ancient books do not record the methods of dispelling the 10 legendary poisonous orchids, so whether it succeeds or not depends on the will of the heavens. This is the Kim Than talisman I begged from the Holy Mother. Keep it with you and don't discard it. Take it. As for the wound on your leg, just clean it thoroughly with antiseptic and it will heal. Tuyết Dung gratefully thanked him. When asked about payment, Master Fook just shook his head. Keep the Kim Than talisman and wait for the 3-day deadline that the blood orchid gives you. If you succeed, come back and pay me. It's not too late then. But if, foolishly speaking, I only hope you can escape unharmed. Tuyết Dung's face saddened, but holding the Kim Than talisman in her hand made her feel more at ease. This was like gambling with her life, but better than desperately awaiting death. Before leaving, Master Fook advised Tuyết Dung, for the next 3 days, don't make any offerings to the blood orchid. During the day, expose it to the sun, and at night, sprinkle salt around its pot. If successful after 3 days and the blood orchid doesn't fulfill the blood ritual, then on the 4th day, you can burn it without any consequences. I hope you'll come back to pay me. With a sigh, Master Fook still believed in some kind of miracle that could save the young girl. Tuyết Dung returned to her old shabby boarding house. After Nam's death, she moved from the upscale apartment to here. In contrast to the somber atmosphere and gloom that the blood orchid previously created, this time, Tuyết Dung felt much more comfortable at home. The Kim Than talisman emitted protective glows, dispelling the terrifying deathly aura. Looking at the blood orchid in the corner, Tuyết Dung shuddered. Her hand reached into her pocket for the Kim Than talisman, and she felt reassured. At least this could protect her from danger. In the dim twilight, Tuyết Dung quickly sprinkled a circle of salt around the blood orchid pot as instructed by Master Fook. Then, exhausted, she sank into sleep immediately because she hadn't been able to close her eyes all night. Tuyết Dung tossed and turned for a while, and when the clock struck midnight, she fell into a horrifying nightmare. A suffocating and chilling sensation enveloped her, causing her head to ache terribly. The voice of the demon echoed from a distant realm once again, sending shivers down her spine. Mortal, do you dare to defy the decree of the blood orchid? Tuyết Dung trembled in fear, her voice trembling. Please, have mercy on me. Don't. The terrifying voice growled angrily. A mortal who breaks promises with the blood orchid and seeks defiance shall perish. The sound reverberated from the blood orchid, exerting immense pressure on Tuyết Dung's ears, making her vaguely open her eyes. But at that moment, her body felt as heavy as lead, and she couldn't lift her legs to flee from this eerie place. Suddenly, the salt around the orchid pot exploded like crackling fire in a pan, darkening and emitting a pungent smell that made Tuyết Dung wrinkle her nose. From the pot, a twisted figure with a large thorn-covered head emerged, glaring at Tuyết Dung intently. Tuyết Dung was so terrified that her limbs went limp, sweat pouring out like a shower, her throat dry and occasionally coughing up phlegm. The salt ring outside the orchid pot couldn't restrain the demon from approaching her any longer. The demon still stood there, staring at Tuyết Dung with its deep crimson eyes on its faceless visage. It couldn't get closer to her because the Kim Thon talisman emitted pure protective glows shielding her. After a while, realizing it couldn't do anything to Tuyết Dung, the demon glared and then returned to the blood orchid pot. Tuyết Dung continued to sink into sleep until morning. The bustling sound of car horns in the city woke Tuyết Dung up. She looked around, never having felt such a warm and peaceful morning. Remembering the events of the previous night sent shivers down her spine, but luckily, the Kim Thon talisman had protected her from the demon's claws. Tuyết Dung resolved to keep the talisman with her at all costs. Tonight, like the previous night, the demon emerged once again to torment Tuyết Dung's spirit, warning her, "You still have one more day to find blood for the ritual. If not, you will become the sacrifice yourself." Though deeply frightened, Tuyết Dung's gaze remained steadfast. "No, I'm not afraid of you anymore. Get lost, you vile demon." The demon casually shook its head. "It's too late. Humans are truly foolish." With that, it let out a howl, its horrifying visage suddenly lunging towards Tuyết Dung, making her startle. But before it could make contact, the protective glow of the talisman caused it to dissipate. Another terrifying night passed by. On the last night before the deadline, Tuyết Dung lay restless in bed, her hand tightly clutching the Kim Thon talisman. As the sacred hour approached, something unusual happened. The demon within the blood orchid did not appear. Tuyết Dung entertained the thought that perhaps the blood orchid had relented and released her. However, a horrifying incident occurred, shattering her recent hopes. Tonight, the sky suddenly unleashed a thunderstorm, with lightning bolts flashing intermittently, accompanied by the rumbling of thunder, adding an urgent sense of dread to the scene. The wind blew fiercely, causing the window frame of Tuyết Dung's room to burst open, the iron nails clashing against the hinges with a sound akin to grinding teeth. Tuyết Dung startled awake, huddling under her blanket as she peered out the window. The sight before her made her blood run cold. Behind the window panes was the image of a child hanging upside down, its limbs clinging to the window frame like a lizard, its face twisted into a mocking grin as it looked at her. Drool dripped from its mouth, splattering onto the windowsill, sending shivers down Tuyết Dung's spine. Before she could regain her composure, the child suddenly fell, uttering a hollow cry. "Return my body." The window now seemed like a large TV screen playing a horror movie, transitioning from one scene to another. Continuing the spectacle, behind the window, the head of a disheveled person appeared, its face contorted in a grotesque manner. Tuyết Dung screamed in terror, but her voice was drowned out by the thunderous noise of the storm outside. She recognized the face, distorted and horrifying though it was, but the mole beneath the eye couldn't be mistaken. It was Thuyan's vengeful spirit. Standing behind the window, Thuyan's mouth contorted as she spoke, making her already ghastly visage even more terrifying. "It's because of you. Because of you I suffered. Pay for it with your life." The sound echoed like a tolling bell, causing Tuyết Dung to clutch her head in agony. Her shadowy figure passing through the window, lunging at Tuyết Dung. Tuyết Dung struggled, but her body felt frozen, only able to sit huddled in a corner of her bed, witnessing each terrifying apparition unfold before her. A metallic taste rose in her throat, and Tuyết Dung coughed up a mouthful of blood, realizing that Huyết Anh Ngải was unleashing her anger upon her by releasing the cursed spirits she had hexed before. Helpless, Tuyết Dung raised her arms in supplication. "Thuyan, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have brought that branch of Ngải home. Please forgive me." Before she could recover from her shock, outside the window, a grayish-green mist suddenly surrounded her, and the space became blurry, revealing two figures. From fear to bewilderment, Tuyết Dung saw the silhouettes of Nam and his lover, Huyên, walking arm in arm, laughing joyously. Amidst their conversation, she could discern mocking and derogatory remarks about her wrinkled, grotesque face. As Nam and Huyên embraced each other tenderly, seemingly noticing Tuyết Dung's gaze, Nam turned and sneered. "Take a good look at yourself. Do you look any different from an 80-year-old crone? Oh, but even an old hag doesn't have a face as hideous as yours. You'd better go die. What's the point of living when you only scare people with your ugliness?" Huyên beside him chimed in with disdain. "Look at that. Still standing there like a man. What kind of woman is she?" Those words were like daggers aimed straight at Tuyết Dung, the pain of which compounded 1,000-fold by the recent torment inflicted by Thuyan's spirit. Tears streamed down her cheeks, soaked with despair, unable to believe that even in the afterlife, Nam and Huyên would still look down on her. Tuyết Dung screamed, clawing at her head with both hands, her eyes filled with bloodshot veins of resentment. She had snapped, hurling all the blankets and pillows around her out the window. "Get out, all of you traitors! Get out!" Screaming in agony, Tuyết Dung lost control, unconsciously throwing away the Kim Thun talisman herself. At this moment, all the horrifying apparitions vanished, but the chilling and eerie sensation continued to pervade the gloomy room. A sudden pain shot from her calf to her brain, jolting Tuyết Dung awake, realizing that she had been under the influence of Huyết Anh Ngải all this time. Panicked, she looked down at her feet to find the wound worsening, the necrosis spreading up to her knees. With no Kim Thun talisman to protect her, Tuyết Dung could only crawl to the door, mustering all her strength and pain to cry for help. "Is anyone there? Help me!" But all she got in response was the thunderous roar accompanied by the sound of pouring rain. The dormitory, usually bustling with students, was now devoid of any response to Tuyết Dung's cries for help. In the bright flashes of lightning, the pot of Huyết Anh Ngải placed in the corner of the room now appeared more menacing than ever. The branches seemed to grow vigorously, each sprouting rapidly. Huyết Anh Ngải extended its branches like human arms, reaching down to the ground, inching closer to Tuyết Dung. Tuyết Dung, horrified, could no longer muster the clarity to unlock the door and rush outside. The sense of impending death loomed over her as she could only croak out each word from her throat. Tuyết Dung had to pay the price for what she had done. Her curiosity and greed, mixed with obscured feelings of vengeance, had indirectly taken several lives, even causing the death of an unborn child, which she had sacrificed to Huyết Anh Ngải. There was no time left for Tuyết Dung to wish she hadn't made those mistakes, to go back and change things. It was all too late. A few days later, some of Tuyết Dung's classmates noticed that she hadn't left her room for 3 to 4 days. As they passed by and knocked on her door, they detected a foul, putrid smell emanating from inside, suspecting something was amiss. One of the students broke down the door and rushed in. Everyone was shocked and horrified to discover that Tuyết Dung had returned to the underworld at some point. Her once fair complexion now pale, with veins bulging under her skin. Her eyes portrayed a terrifying expression, as if she had encountered something extremely dreadful before returning to the realm of the dead. More horrifyingly, pus and greenish-yellow ooze were seeping from the protruding nodules on Tuyết Dung's body. Inside, they even found numerous sharp thorn-like branches growing out of her, a sight too horrifying for most present to bear, causing many to vomit at the scene. Subsequently, the police arrived to seal off the area and conduct an investigation. Ultimately, they concluded that Tuyết Dung had been infected by an unidentified bacterium, but even thereafter, no one would ever know the supernatural and horrifying truth behind her demise. The end.